So for those of you that want to see it, here is example 2 done in its entirety with 2 different ways to do it. One using proper math on the left hand side here, the other one using the cross multiply divide method on the right hand side here. You're going to have to pause the video here if you want to copy this down, because in about 3 seconds I'm going to erase it. As well as example 3, if you want to see it, there it is done in its entirety as well for you there. So again, pause the video and you can copy it down and work from there if you wish. I am though going to very quickly erase this and then work through it to show you how to get to the final answer. Okay, so there we are, erasing quickly. So example number 2. Determine the length of a side adjacent to a given angle. Determine the length of Vx. So Vx in our triangle is this side length here, Vx, this one right here. Okay, so if that's what we're going to try and determine, first of all, the first thing I do whenever I'm doing trig questions is I write down my acronym, SOHCAHTOA, and this tells me my 3 different trig ratios. Sine is opposite over hypotenuse, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, and tangent is opposite over adjacent. Now, obviously with section 2 or chapter 2, the first section 1 and 2, we were only dealing with tangent, but after this section, we're gonna be looking at all 3 trig ratios. Okay, so on our triangle here, I go over. So once I have my acronym written down, I go to my triangle, and again, remember that everything is based on what angle we're talking about in the triangle. So I first need to label my triangle with adjacent, hypotenuse, and opposite. I can very quickly label this side over here being my hypotenuse. It's the longest side of the right triangle. It's also opposite to the 90-degree angle. Next thing, as I figure out what angle we're talking about, what angle is given. This angle here, 42 degrees, is given to me. So from there, I label my adjacent side and my opposite side. This side here, opposite to that angle, is my opposite side. This side here, Vx or XV or Vx, whichever, is my adjacent side. It's beside the angle I'm talking about. So I know from my question I'm trying to calculate this side length. I only have this side length. So I think to myself, well, what trig ratio, sine, cosine, or tangent, relates adjacent and opposite? And go back over to here. Which trig ratio relates adjacent and opposite? And that would be tangent. So I know I have to use the tangent ratio. If I know I have to use the tangent ratio, then the first place I start is from the formula. Always, 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 tangent of some angle is equal to opposite over adjacent. I know that the angle we're talking about, now I do my substitution, the angle we're talking about is 42 degrees, and my opposite side is 7.2. And my adjacent side is XV, right? VXV or VX? VX they called it. VX. And just for simplicity, I'm actually going to simplify VX and call it my adjacent side. Just give me my A. So it's a little easier to track if I just have a single variable. So now I use my handy dandy calculator and I punch tangent 42 into my calculator. Again, depending on the calculator, depends on what steps you have to do in order to get that value. But you should be able to get a value of 0.90040404443. And if you can't, then something's going wrong. Whether it be the way you're punching it in your calculator or a setting on your calculator, because sometimes they get set in a measurement like gradients or radians that won't work for us. So you'll have to see me about that, because your calculator has to be in degrees. Is equal to 7.2 over A. Now, mathematically, if I want this A by itself because it's in the denominator of the fraction, the first thing I need to do is get it out of the denominator, so I multiply this side by A. Because I multiply the right-hand side of the equal sign by A, I multiply the left-hand side of the equal sign by A. So I get, and this is an intermediate step that you may or may not need to write down, I get A times 0.90040404443 is equal to, well, A, 7.2 times A divided by A, these cancel. I'm just left with 7.2. Now, in order to get a by itself over here, I need to divide by this, 0.90040404443. Because I do it on that side of the equal sign, I have to do it on the other side of the equal sign. So I divide by 0.90040404443. Well, a times that, a times 0.900 divided by 0.900, these are going to cancel. I'm just left with a. And then 7.2 divided by that gives me 7.9964101007. Or rounded to the proper places, because the question doesn't tell us, I'm going to make sure this 6 makes this 9 a 10, and that 9 makes that a 10. So it's going to be 8.00, and my units, centimeters. Okay, and again, well, not again, I'm sure I've said it before, but there is a different way from this point here to calculate this out using cross multiply divide method. So let me show you that over here, and I'll change colors. I'll change to blue. So you're at this stage. You're at 0.90040404443 is equal to 7.2 over a. If I make this a fraction by putting it over 1, I now have two equal fractions. That's called a proportion. I can cross multiply and divide to solve for a. So I'm going to cross multiply 1 times 7.2, and then I'm going to divide by 0.900. So that will look like this. That will leave me a is equal to 1 times 7.2 divided by 0.900404443, which works out to 7.996410107, exactly what we had before, rounded to 2 decimal places, which makes that 8 centimeters. So you can see I get to exactly the same place by doing two different methods to get to the same question. Now, whichever one works best for you, this method here on the left-hand side, this is a more mathematically sound method. Later on in your upper level math and chemistry and physics, this will be the method you'll be asked to use, or you'll need to use, because you'll have multiple steps. Simple quick calculation though, you can use the cross multiply divide. And cross multiply divide is a fail-safe. It will never fail you if you have two fractions that are equated to each other with only one variable to solve for. Okay, so I'll come back, I'll do example 3, and then that'll be it for section 2.2.